What is up, fight fans? It's Jordan Kurtz here with the MMA plug on Mile High Sports. We are coming to you live from the number 38, presented to you by Volo. Back in the studio after being away for a couple of weeks with the boys out there, boots on the ground, covering all things Broncos related at Dove Valley. Speaking of all of that, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe all platforms for Mile High Sports, wherever it is possible. They're giving you nothing but the latest and greatest on all things CU, the Broncos, with the season just about to start, coming to the final weeks of training camp. You have off-season talk with the Avalanche. You also have plenty of discussion points going around with the Denver Nuggets this offseason. And then we get to the Rockies. Now, the Rockies, they're 36-90 right now. I do believe that they are going to beat the run rate or the timeline to not be the first team to hit 100 losses the way that the last year's Chicago White Sox did. So I think they might be a little bit safe there, and that could be in large due to the run that they've went on in the last 5 games. They've went 4-1 in the last 5. They're sitting at 36-90 overall. Could they be heating up because of their new hotter than the asphalt during the dog days of summer in-game host, Gianna Girardi? Maybe. I mean, I know I'd be playing a hell of a lot better if I saw her out there rocking the mic and in front of the camera. That's enough motivation right there. Hell, I'm publicly shooting my shot right now. What's up, Gianna? But moving along from that, we have, I just want to say thank you so much to the rest of the Mile High Sports crew out there covering all things in the sports world. Again, hit that like, share, and subscribe button wherever it is possible. We got the Colorado rundown with some events coming up over the next couple of weeks. Big one being you have Sparta Sports and Entertainment. They're back at it with a fight night in a couple of weeks at the, believe this one is at the Blue Sports Stadium in Superior. That's going to be on August 30th. You are also going to have, you're going to have CJJC back in the mix the last weekend of September. That's going down at the Tattoo Convention just a couple of blocks away from here at the National Western. And then in October, there's going to be a full run of events. We'll give you the updated schedule as soon as we have all of the dates confirmed for those here in the next couple of weeks. Moving from there, we have the weekend recap. We had a ton of fighters in action all across the board from this region, and just going to cover some of the highlights and the results from some of those out there on the regional scene as well as on the big show, and then covering last week's UFC 319 card. On the regional scene, we had for Fury, you had Carlos Rivera of Victory MMA picking up a guillotine win in the second round. I believe that puts Carlos up to 3-1. Carlos is a very skilled fighter out of Southern Colorado, and he's looking to continue to forge that path, getting closer to the big show, moving forward there. In the PFL, we had multiple fighters from Colorado on that card. I want to give a big shout out to Justin Wetzel. He had an incredible run in this 2025 run in the PFL Bantamweight tournament. He did finish as the runner-up, and while moral victories don't count in the win column nor in the bank account, I do believe, though, that this season proved what we've said on this show for years, and that Justin Wetzel is among the best 135ers on the planet, and he just needed his opportunity on a big show to go out there and prove it. He was a big underdog coming into the season, makes it all the way to the finals, and has a competitive run at it. Hey, hats off to you, Justin. I look forward to what you do next year in that tournament. Following from that, you had Chris Cossack Mixon, also of high altitude, that was on the card, and he picked up a victory by first round TKO. But I think that the biggest story on this card was in the main event. The main event, you had Alfie Davis pulling off the tremendous upset as a plus 705 underdog, according to the official Tapology records, and he became the PFL 155-pound champion and $500,000 richer over the minus 1060 favorite, Gadzi Rabadanov, who at the very beginning of this season had that highlight reel finish over Kevin Lee, that Kevin Lee also stated as one of the worst injuries that he's ever sustained in his fight career, blah, blah, blah. That's who he picked up the victory over. In Chicago, you had UFC 319 going down. You had a massive return for Khamzat Chimaev here stateside for one. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the program. He challenged Dricus du Plessis, who, full disclosure, I did not see the fight going that way. I did not see it being a shutout that was as dominant as we've ever seen of a performance from a challenger in a UFC title fight. Dricus definitely does not get an immediate rematch. And then also, if we're just looking at those two in the stylistic matchup, I don't know that Dricus can ever get to the point to where he can catch Khamzat. I think the skill gap is just far too wide. Right now in the middleweight division, there is kind of a four-man bracket right now, if you will, for who is the potential next guy in line for the title shot. I don't believe that any of this falls in line with Khamzat saying that he wants to have a turnaround in Abu Dhabi. I just don't think that it aligns with any of the top contenders who are right now sorting it out for those matchups. As we know, in a couple of weeks, we have Kyle Bahalyo, who's going to be taking on Nasruddin Imavov. If somebody were to get in and out of that matchup clean and early, there is the possibility for a few week turnaround for that Abu Dhabi card that's in October. However, from a business perspective, from the champion's perspective, I just don't see that that's something that makes sense. I don't see that if you have Khamzat finally as a champion, which is essentially like a prophecy, if you will, something that was maktub. It was written years ago, as soon as he signed to the UFC in 2020, when he burst onto the scene on Fight Island. I don't think that you turn him around this quick without giving him the full champions tour of media and so on and so forth. That's just one man's opinion, but crazier things have happened. We shall see how that unfolds. But again, those couple of contenders matchups who essentially we're looking at a matchup with Bahalyo and Imavov, and then just announced you have Fluffy Hernandez, who's going to be taking RDR. I think that you could conceivably see that the winner of the Bahalyo Imavov matchup gets the next title fight, but you could also see, depending on what Khamzat's activity schedule and based off of where his activity has been over the last couple of years, those might be a title eliminator fight of the winner of those two matchups toward the end of the year, and then Khamzat fights the winner of that in the beginning of 2026. But again, that's all way in the future, looking off in the distance, and a little bit more on Khamzat later. In the co-main event, you had Aaron Pico make Lerone Murphy a title contender or a title challenger, basically. This was a fight that was Avoyev's to lose. Avoyev gets hurt and he's out of the mix. And then right now you have Aaron Pico get inserted against Lerone Murphy. The knock against Lerone Murphy was that there was never really this highlight or this danger or wow factor and moment that jumped off the screen that said, yes, this is a guy that we could put the UFC and TKO marketing machine behind. This is a guy that we can sell to the public. Because before that, he was a decisionator. If you look back at his record, it's been years since he's had a finish. Aaron Pico was his Huckleberry and gave him that highlight reel that had the attention of the champion, Alexander Volkanovski, who tweeted in response, "See you in December." More on that later. Back-to-back spinning elbow finishes. In the feature fight, you had a 170-pound matchup of Carlos Prates of the Fighting Nerds taking on Jeff Neal. I thought at best Jeff Neal has a puncher's chance coming into this fight. We said it in the preview that Jeff Neal is a really good fighter and he's a quality dude who is going to give you a litmus test at the welterweight division. And he's in that gatekeeper role. He's never going to be someone who goes over the top and goes on a title run at this stage, especially getting finished again in the process. But he's somebody who is a quality fighter, a very savvy veteran, and someone who can mix it up and will give problems to any rising contender in the process. Carlos Prates, on the flip side, he suffered his first defeat in the UFC a few months back, taking on Ian Machado Gary, formally, if you will. has a big bounce back victory and gets that highlight reel, has his post fight cigarette in the presser. And, again, I think that was just a minor setback in what is a very storied and illustrious run going forward for Carlos. I think that guy is one of the most exciting fighters in all of this new wave of talent that's emerged in the last year and a half of the UFC. What's next for him? I'm not entirely sure. There's a lot of moving parts toward the top of the division in the welterweight ranks. And I do know that no matter what the fight is, he has a style that is must see TV every single time that he makes the walk. So that's somebody to absolutely keep your eyes on going forward. And him having a follow up affair to suffer in his first loss in the octagon, I think that it was encouraging to see that he came out there fighting his game and gets the highlight reel in the process. Next fight from that, you had a middleweight bout between Michael Venom Page taking on the former UFC title challenger, Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier is a quality fighter, as mentioned, former title challenger, but now at his age, he started to slow down. And it was very evident in that fight. Now, granted, 99.9% of anybody who's ever fought is going to look slow in there against MVP. But speed kills. And in this fight, MVP was just so fast that he could dart in and out. He dropped Cannonier and had him hurt a couple of times. He was dancing on him and emoting all over the place. That's a big win for Michael Venom Page, who it's interesting to see what direction he chooses to go moving forward with his career in the UFC, being that he's fought at both 170 as well as 185. He's had success at 185 against both Sharabullet Magomedov as well as now here in Jared Cannonier. But then he's also had success down at welterweight against guys like Kevin Holland. So he's got some options that are on the table. He said that he would love to go down to Brazil and fight in a few months against Carlos Prates. I don't know that that's a great fight for the UFC to make, considering where Prates is and where he's kind of ascending toward the top of the division and where you see where MVP fits as a title eliminator or where he's at. I guess it all depends on where the UFC sees that path and that trajectory for Prates. Whereas on the flip side, it looks like they've been setting up MVP with a lot of fun fights that are stylistically going to be entertaining. Again, what that looks like for either one of those, I'm not entirely sure. There is a matchup that I want to throw out there for all of you guys. This would either be a thrilling and just entirely entertaining bout of two top-tier strikers, or it could also make for one of the most boring snooze fests that you've ever seen. And I offer you the last style bender, Israel Adesanya. Again, that has the matchup potential to either be fireworks or it has the potential to be a complete snooze fest. I don't really see it being in between. But if you're going to give me the chance for what is the potential and what could be some of the theatrics and the antics in the buildup as well as actually within the cage, both of them are in the later stages of their 30s. Give me that fun fight for both of them. You had an upset with Tim Elliott going out there and pulling off the guillotine choke. Topside guillotine is so crazy from somebody like Tim who has that just ironclad squeeze against Kai Asakura. Kai Asakura was a high-profile signee coming out of the Ryzen promotion, was a former champion, a highlight reel machine before he got signed to the UFC. Since then, things have not gone his way. Obviously, the Pantoja fight, I mean, who hasn't Pantoja had his way with, as we've documented on this program? But this was a fight that seemingly on paper was a winnable matchup against an older veteran of Tim Elliott. But as my good friend and former UFC veteran Zach Cummings said online after the fight, no. You can never count Tim Elliott out of a fight. Never count him out of a fist fight. He's Midwest tough and gritty, and plain and simple, he is awkward. Some of the things that he did in that fight were so awkward that they threw Asakura off, and it was able to ultimately work in Tim's favor. Tim then goes on to secure the submission. And again, hey, you're talking about a guy who has been around the block, spun it back 3 times and more. Had a run early on. Loses 2 out of the UFC, makes his way back in. And if you think of some of the prominent figures that are out there, he's the last of that big crop of 25ers who were all birthed to the UFC from by way of that Ultimate Fighter season. I believe it was 24. He wins that, earns the title shot against Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Obviously loses that fight, but if you think of some of the names that were involved with that season, you had on the show as coaches, you had Joe Benavidez, you had Henry Cejudo. On the show as cast members, you had Brandon Moreno, you had Alexandre Pantoja, you had Kai Kara France. You had some of these guys who were still kind of in the fold and the mix, still getting his hand raised all these years later. You have Tim Elliott. Gotta love seeing the old dog still going out there and figuring out a way to get the win, and got himself a bonus in the process. The next fight from that I think is worth highlighting, Khamzat Chimaev once upon a time captured the world by storm by winning 2 fights within 2 weeks over on Fight Island. His teammate, his buddy, Baisinger Susakayev, he said, hold my beer. 4 days. Susakayev wins on the Contender Series last Tuesday. First round finish, first round TKO. Says, I want to fight right away. Well, wish granted. Saturday, from Tuesday to Saturday, dude fought twice inside of 1 week. Goes out there and gets the submission victory, this time against Eric Nolan. I mean, if you want to talk about somebody who sees the moment, congratulations to Susakayev right there. I mean, he knew that it was going to be all eyes on him and on the team based off of the Khamzat connection. And on short notice, he took the Contender Series fight. And then on even shorter notice, again, just 4 days, takes the fight at UFC 319, wins both of those by finish. Looking forward to seeing what that kid does going forward. Another couple of fights to talk about before we move along in the program. Man, as much as I love GM3, I think that GM3 needs to maybe start to figure out where the end of the rope is. This was another KO TKO finish, this time suffered at the hands of Michael Olejczyk. Olejczyk, originally out of Poland, now has joined forces with the Fighting Nerds, has added to his skill set all the way around, but what he has by far and large been known for throughout his career is his boxing and the power within his hands. That played true on Saturday night. Lupita Godinez picked up a victory against Jessica Andrade. You know, ever since Jessica Andrade lost the title, she hasn't had, and especially since signing that massive contract a couple of years ago, she really hasn't had a whole lot of success in the octagon. I don't know if this is a programming thing. I don't know if this is a coaching, a psyche thing, or what it is. But I do also think that her being so active amidst a lot of losses or some considerable adversity within the process, I think that she has to take some time off. She should certainly take some time away, go back to the drawing board, realign the physical as well as the mental, and then see what is next beyond that. Because I guess just maybe it's from the outside looking in as someone who thought that, wow, she is such a juggernaut when she rose to become to be that strawweight champion, and some of the fights that she had where she just put people away. But to a certain extent, you could also make the argument that she hasn't evolved and that her style has been figured out. that is also in part why I think that she should take some time away to go work on evolving that style so that she has different layers to her game that people don't have to just say, hey, all I got to worry about is avoid a brawl and avoid being essentially unloaded upon with that giant overhand. If you can beat those couple of things, you can beat Jessica Andrade at this point, and she has lost the aura. She has lost the confidence to go out there and be that just killer, the person who had no fear, who could walk into the fire and say, you know what, it's you or me. And when it's all said and done, I'm going to be standing. She does not have that confidence anymore. It's not to say that, or not trying to take anything away from Lupita, because I do believe that Lupi has championship potential in the 115-pound division. She was an LFA champion. She has a sister who is in the midst of an Olympic goal or Olympian goals on the wrestling side of things. You know, she's somebody who puts in the work. She has that grind and the mindset and does everything right to put herself in a position to succeed. And she has fought some of the who's who of tough competition already so far in her UFC run. She's been active. And I think that before we see Lupi lose again, I wouldn't be surprised if she is in talks to challenge for a UFC title. Just keep that on your back burner there. Moving from that, we have a Denver fighter who sealed the deal in emphatic fashion with just 2 seconds left on the clock in the first round. You had friend of the program, Alexander the Great Ape Hernandez, knocking out Chase Hooper. Alex looked great in this fight. You know, Chase is a guy who his Achilles heel throughout his career has been the striking. On the flip side, the fast twitch, explosive hands of Alexander Hernandez have produced him highlight after highlight throughout his run in the promotion. And this was another one to add to it. Big win for Alexander the Great Ape Hernandez. Puts together a couple of wins there, and looking forward to see what's going for him forward. You had a matchup between Drakkar Klose taking on Edson Jr. Barbosa. The sad thing is with Klose is, man, he is such a talented fighter, and he is a really good person in the mix who presents some stylistic matchups for a lot of guys at 155 pounds. But the problem is he's already in his later 30s. So there's not a lot of time left on the clock. And where does that cliff hit? Going to be tough to tell. But right now, I think time is of the essence, and he's still got some time left in him, and he's got some great fights underneath his belt. On the flip side, Barbosa takes the loss in this. Physically, Barbosa still looks great, but you know, you just question the damage accumulation factor through all the years, and when is the right time for Edson to walk away? And I say this from just an observation that I had. Physically, like especially, you know, neck down, Barbosa still looks immaculate. I mean, the dude is carved out of stone, looks like he is in top tier shape. But when you look at Barbosa in the face, take a look at Barbosa's face, especially that shot of the camera that they had of him shadow boxing just prior to making the walk. Look at that as opposed to years ago when he came into the UFC. Granted, yes, I know he's a fighter and he's going to wear damage, but he looks so completely different with the damage, the scarring, the scar tissue, the structural changes from when he entered the UFC. And take a look at it. I believe it was his right eye. There's something that's going on with it. It has a crazy droop to it that I felt like was noticeable. And that's where sometimes when you see the cuts that happen in fights, you say, oh, well, that cut may not be that bad. Well, what you don't know is in the layers or things that are, you know, maybe tendons or muscles or other aspects of your body that make your eye work properly or hold in place. And Edson's got a noticeable droop in that eye, and who knows what the level of vision is. Is he having some Michael Bisping action or some sharp bullet to where they're pulling off some trickery for him to be able to pass the vision exam? I mean, you just barely have to be above legally blind anyway for it to pass, which is kind of crazy, but that's a whole different discussion. Just something that I found noteworthy and something that I observed. Quick mention of last week's Contender Series. All 5 earned contracts, or excuse me, I should say last night's Contender Series. Some of the notables from the card, you had Jose Delano, standout from the LFA, coming from Brazil. He fought Michael Stack here in a main event in Denver. But one thing that has to be at least mentioned when it comes to Delano is that he has had issues with making weight in the past. A couple of times he had the opportunity to fight for the LFA 145-pound title, and he missed weight in each of those. So he was never crowned the champion, although he won both of those fights. That was 3 years ago. He was 25, so maybe you can chalk that unprofessionalism up to the youthful immaturity and that he's got it dialed in now as a 28-year-old who is signed to the biggest organization in the world. He hasn't missed weight since those episodes, but again, just something to put on the radar. The other notable signee from this week's episode was Josh Hokett. Josh spent a year on the P squad with the 49ers. He was also a dual sport athlete at Fresno State, where he was an All-American. He wrestled as a heavyweight, and he played fullback and tight end in football. As has became his customary tradition, after winning the fight, he cut a crazy promo asking to be signed, calling out the entire heavyweight division and saying that they're in large a bunch of fat, lazy guys. Not wrong. We've said it many times on this show. How far he goes is never going to be a guarantee, but what we can say is that at 27 years old, he's a youthful and athletic shot of energy into the bloodstream of a heavyweight division that is largely on life support. At 6'1", 230, some pointed out online that he's a little small for the division compared to some of his peers. And I hear you. I do understand, but I will counter you a couple of examples. Fedor Emelianenko, Cain Velasquez, and Strikeforce champion era Daniel Cormier. They were all roughly that size, give or take an inch on the shorter side for DC, or 10 pounds heavier for Cain. If you look at the averages of where they competed during those championship runs, they're all roughly at about that exact same mark for the vitals that Josh has. Now, I'm not saying that he is the next coming of any one of those historically great champions, but what I am saying is that at an undefeated 6-0 with all finishes, 3 KO TKOs, 3 submissions, his combination of NFL level athleticism with D1 wrestling makes him a legit prospect for you to keep your eyes on for what he brings to the cage. When you add to the mix his theatrics and promos, as thin as the heavyweight division is right now, you have a guy who might be just a couple of performances away from being a ranked contender here in the UFC. There has always been a known bias toward the bigger weight classes, and make no mistake about it, if Josh gets some momentum, especially with his WWE style promos, that parent company TKO, who owns both the UFC and the WWE, you don't think that they're going to put some resources behind this man and sell some of that story of him being the dual sport collegiate athlete who had a cup of tea in the NFL? You don't think that they're going to try to sell that? You're crazy. Moving along from that, we have the weekend preview this weekend. Going to get through a couple on the regional scene and then get to the UFC talk. In the PFL, friend of the program, you have Hercules Dalton Rasta fighting in the 185-pound finals. He has a tall test on his hands. Another guy who came over from the Bellator ranks. These guys have had a lot of bad blood and words exchanged back and forth between each other in the build-up to this fight. You have Fabian Edwards. Now, why does that name sound familiar? Well, yes, you did guess it right. That is Leon's brother. On the card, you also have former UFC heavyweight Alexander Romanov. He is in the finals taking on Oleg Popov. Now, Alexander Romanov was a guy who we also thought at one point was going to be a heavyweight contender in the UFC, a big athletic guy who had some strong grappling in his tool belt. But then somewhere along the way, he kind of, he lost track, or that cart got taken off of the tracks. He stopped looking to be in the same physical shape that he was in some of those fights. Now, I don't know if it was injury or what it was, but there's also been a couple of fights where it's just very peculiar finishes for Romanov because he's had some groin strikes that have resulted in the fight being completely stopped. In the last one, he was carted out of the cage and off into the back. So, going to be interesting to see what happens in this finals here. Does he get that heavyweight championship for the PFL and get that 500K, or does that go to the Russian Oleg Popov? Fighting out of pound for pound in Littleton, you have Andrew Elderte Sanchez taking on the former PFL champion Ipa Kasanganay. You also have a multiple-time title challenger, Joshua Silveira, back in action on the card. And also want to give a shout-out to Bryce Meredith, who will be getting down on the card as well. Bryce Meredith made the announcement on his Instagram that next year he's also going to be competing in that PFL featherweight tournament. So the former Wyoming wrestling standout, looking forward to seeing him this weekend and what he brings to the table going forward. In the LFA, you have a matchup between the Bosnian bombshell, friend of the program, Nayra Rep. She is going to be on the card back after a year of time off, getting back to the drawing board, fixing up some tools, sharpening up the blades, and getting to action this weekend. You also have Natalia Spies getting down, Tally Payne, fresh off of a tour over in Thailand and getting after it. And then in the main event, you have Richie Miranda, who has done some training out here in Colorado before. He's getting ready to defend that 155-pound title. Check that out on UFC Fight Pass. The Road to UFC finals card. Road to the UFC is, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a tournament for a lot of Asian-based fighters to make their way to the UFC. The A side of the main event of this attraction, who is now signed to the UFC, got there by way of this exact pathway, and that's Ming Shi. She became a viral sensation. She returns this weekend against Bruna Brazil. It's been a while since we've seen her, so I'm pumped. I mean, the head kick knockout that she had, that was something that I feel like for any fighter, regardless of the circumstance, is going to go viral. But then you add to it that she is a doctor in her day job who her parents didn't even know that she was a fighter until she was on the Big Show. It's absolutely crazy. Like, she was so traditional and so hidden from this side of her and compartmentalized that part of her life that I cannot wait to see what she does going forward. And as she grows with more notoriety out there in the space, the internet has been clamoring for her return, and they get to see it this Saturday. Moving from there, the big card being the UFC Shanghai preview. There's a couple of matchups here that I think that the UFC did a tremendous job for this being an international card. There's a few fights that I think will certainly also give some real clarity towards the top of the division or where certain guys are at within their respective careers. Starting off at the top, you have a light heavyweight matchup between Johnny Walker taking on Mingyang Zhang. I think that this is an opportunity for Zhang to go have a breakout performance against a known guy. He has the chance to call it for what it is. I mean, no disrespect to my man, Anthony Smith, but that was a breakout performance that he had to really kind of put himself on the map a couple of months back. And then now that obviously earned him a main event opportunity against Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker was the guy who at one point in time, many had touted as the future of the division. Injuries and a few camp changes and multiple things have contributed to Johnny Walker's ups and downs since that point. But Mingyang Zhang is not of the typical mold for a lot of fighters that we see coming out of China. In most cases, we see a lot more of a soft-spoken approach, if you will, a lot more, I mean, I don't want to necessarily say humble, but for lack of a better term, a humble persona in the media, if you will. Zhang does not care about going out there and being the heel. He cut a heel promo and relished in the booze, waved on more of that hate and more of the booze and to stoke the crowd after his last fight, knowing that he was not the hometown guy, not the guy who was, essentially who was on his send-off, who the crowd wanted to see win on his farewell tour. Him having that sort of charisma, him being able to speak some English in the process, if he goes out there and puts Johnny Walker on a highlight reel, which we all know is a very definite possibility. Johnny Walker Johnny Walker has had some of the most comical been on the wrong side of some comical knockouts. And I fully respect what it takes to go out there and get in the cage and do it. And I know that could sound bad, but it is a thing. Like, look at some of the fashions in which Johnny Walker has been finished, and it's cartoonish. There's no way around it. Johnny Walker, on the flip side, does have that finishing ability to where he can do the same exact thing to Zhang, but Zhang, with where he's at, being a rising contender, I think that this is an opportunity for him to forge his path closer to becoming a title contender in the 205-pound division. You have a featherweight matchup between T-City Brian Ortega taking on the Funk Master Aljamain Sterling. I like this fight. You have a couple of jiu-jitsu wizards who are going after in this co-main event fight. Now, do we see grappling exchanges between these guys, or does this follow what we kind of seen in the past where you have two top-tier grapplers? Do we see them slug it out a little bit more on the feet? Should we see action unfold on the feet? I do believe that Brian Ortega has the boxing advantage against Aljo. I think that Aljo holds a wrestling advantage, and I know that Aljo has tremendous submission skills. T-City also has tremendous submission skills. How does that fare with Aljo's wrestling? I think that's why we got to see him fight the fight. I am just excited to see those two get after it. Those are two veterans who have been around the block. Ortega has challenged for a title at 145 pounds. Aljamain, obviously the former 135-pound champion. Two guys that want to get back into title discussion. Whoever wins this fight, if someone is able to pull off a big finish, I definitely think that that helps put you closer into those talks. You have a feature bout in the heavyweight division. You have Sergey Pavlovich making his return against Waldo Cortez Acosta. You have two guys who want to punch each other's lights out. Waldo Cortez Acosta, the fast baller who was formerly of the Cincinnati Reds organization as a pitcher. And you have Sergey Pavlovich, who prior to the fight where he lost to Aspinall, everybody thought was going to be the heavyweight champion. And they thought that, his hand speed, his punching power, you just watch him shadow box and there's nobody who can run with this, blah, blah, blah. Well, you found out that at heavyweight, everybody has power. Everybody can get touched. With there being some shifts at the top, John out of the mix, Tom now being the undisputed champion, or John, whatever, back in the testing pool, whatever the drama with John is. Who knows? That changes. In 5 minutes, we'll have a whole different update on the John story. But can Pavlovich get himself back toward a title fight? I think that he is a stylistic advantage this weekend to do so, but, it's the heavyweight division. Again, anything can happen. All it takes is one. Waldo Cortez Acosta at 14-1, he's no slouch. You have Sumaderji taking on Kevin Borjas. You have a matchup in the 155-pound division on the prelims, who I think that this is going to be a big performance, or this is not necessarily a must-win fight, but it's a need-to-win fight, I feel like, for Gage Young. Gage Young is going over there, taking on Maheshate, the young American fighting out of Kansas City. He needs to get his hand raised in this affair. He can't go 0-2 to start his UFC run. I just don't think that puts you in a good position to start off, although he does have a ton of talent and he is extremely young. I just think that you need to get the foot in the right direction and get your hand raised on Saturday. A couple of other matchups to talk about on the prelims before we move along. You have a matchup between Loner Kavanaugh and Charles Energy Johnson. This fight has fireworks written all over it. Listen, you have two highly conflicting styles. Charles Johnson, he got a win here in Denver last summer for the UFC against Joshua Van, who's coincidentally going to be fighting for a title in the flyweight division here shortly. But Charles Johnson is a guy who, he's a volume fighter. It favors him more and more in fights when he has the 5 rounds, or when he can put a pace on somebody. Obviously, he had multiple 5-round fights in the LFA as a champion who defended. Haven't seen necessarily that run in the UFC. But he's a guy who, as the fight goes on, it helps because him being a former cross country standout, a Tiger Muay Thai scholarship winner, cardio is a massive part of Charles' game. Somebody like Kavanaugh, though, Kavanaugh is a sprinter. Loner Kavanaugh goes in there and he wants to punch your head into another atmosphere. The Englishman with Chinese descent looks to go out there and captivate an audience with a knockout to continue his undefeated record and push him to 10-0. He has a very tough test against Charles Johnson, who is multifaceted with his skill set, who does have wrestling that I think can potentially neutralize some of what Loner brings to the mix. But again, Loner is as dangerous of a prospect as it gets in the 125-pound division. He's came in and has won in his UFC run. I think that his fight on the Contender Series against An Ho was a fight that gives you just a good idea of what this kid is willing to do. An Ho was another undefeated prospect who was known for putting kids on highlight reels and starching them. Loner Kavanaugh said, I am not afraid to go step into the fire and walk away whistling. Well, lo and behold, wins by knockout, is now perfect in his run in the UFC. Again, very tough opponent for him going forward. You have another fighter with Denver ties on the card this weekend. You have Austin Thud Hubbard taking on Hongju. I will never not look at Hongju and think of John Anik. John Anik has one of the most hilarious pre-fight sound bites with Hongju, where he basically said that this is what I think of when the cops pull me over. You got the wrong Jew. I thought that it was hilarious. You have a middleweight matchup between Michel Pereira, who welcomes the return of Darth Vader Kyle Daukaus. Daukaus had a run in the UFC, went back down to the regional scene, went on a run, got himself re-signed. Anytime that you're facing Pereira, that's a tough test. That dude is the ultimate wild card when it comes to fighting. He's either going to come out with a blitzkrieg style and it will just suffocate you. I mean, the dude is so fast twitch, has so much strength, power, and is a literal caged bull. But if you're able to weather that storm, or if you can get to the body, he's not unbeatable. He does have 13 losses on his record, and he has shown on multiple occasions that if you can weather his storm, he fades dramatically. How does Daukaus fare against that? I don't know. Stylistically, I think that it's going to be a very tough matchup for the jiu-jitsu heavy guy to go out there and be able to wrangle in somebody like Pereira. What do you guys think, though? You could let me know on social media. That wraps it up for our UFC Shanghai card. Moving along to a topic that had many divided following UFC 319. Ladies and gentlemen, Khamzat pitched a shutout. Deal with it. There was many a casuals out there who absolutely hated the fight, who could not stand the way that 25 minutes of action unfolded. And a large vocal piece to that was from the Barstool crew, I should say, especially focused directly there in Chicago in Big Cat. Big Cat came out and said, if you wrestle a guy for 25 minutes and don't submit him, you should lose the fight. That is the most asinine, horrible, casual take that I've ever heard. Because you're taking away all accountability for DDP not having any bit of skill set or any sort of technical acumen to get up from the bottom. Yeah, it's an easier said than done type of task, but technically the skill set was not there. And you're discrediting the superiority of the abilities and the skill set of Khamzat being able to neutralize a world champion who everybody gave all of the blue flex and bust out type of credit leading into this matchup. You're taking all of that away. Some of the casuals or some of the rhetoric toward Khamzat following the weekend is that Boers is a boring fighter. How do we get to that point? Before that fight, nobody was saying that at all. Let's just revisit some of how this has gone along. 5 years ago on Fight Island, Khamzat announced his presence with authority by finishing 2 fights in 2 weeks. The promos, all the crazy rhetoric of him being this boogeyman coming for everybody in 2 divisions had Khamzat pegged as the boogeyman since 2020. Nobody ever said that he was a boring fighter. Now, numerous reasons throughout the last 5 years have limited Khamzat's activity schedule, whether it be visa issues, illnesses, injuries, or whatever the sort. But alas, he finally got the nod, finally got the title shot that was long awaited, and had 12 pounds of gold wrapped around his waist after one of the most dominant performances by a challenger in UFC title fight history. He's a polarizing figure to many. But as a rising superstar, and as the X's and O's in the cage go as a fighter specifically, Chimaev is for real. Make no mistake about it. Look, I get the reasons for criticism, like his close relationship with the Chechen dictator and warlord with numerous human rights violations in Ramzan Kadyrov, who he was seen on social media making his return back to Chechnya, welcomed by him off of the plane, handed him the belt. Reason for criticism. I get it. The way that he handled the weight cut botch against Nate Diaz, which then resulted in him fighting Kevin Holland and not really being contrite or having remorse over the situation, that turned people off. I get it. The inactivity. I get it. The way that and it was a joking exchange with Daniel Cormier last week, but he referred to himself as a terrorist. For some people, they felt that this was distasteful, considering his previous visa issues under the previous administration, on the grounds of him being associated with agents of terror and people such as Kadyrov. What I can say in relation to that conversation or that interaction is Khamzat's a funny guy. Like, he actually is. Like, I can speak to it from a personal standpoint of I've met Khamzat and I've spent time with him. Not going to act like, we're good buddies, friends, whatever, but I did spend, probably close to an hour hanging out with him and Guram Kutataladze one day when we were both having delayed flights from gates that were next to each other out of Jacksonville a couple of years ago when he had a fight against Gilbert Burns, which, mind you, fight of the year contender. And then just a couple of interactions throughout the week at the hotel. No, I can tell you that, like, to his friends or interpersonally, like, Khamzat is a funny guy. He likes to crack jokes. He likes to kind of troll with his buddies. So in that sense, him and DC sitting there talking, and DC busting his chops, saying that he has bad skin and calling him a Chechen with, that's basically calling him ugly in relation to DC calling himself good looking. He made a funny comment. Did it off-put some people? Sure, but get over it. Again, I don't understand where this narrative from the casuals comes from that after UFC 319 that Khamzat is a boring fighter. Such a terrible take. First off, prior to Saturday, Khamzat's only went the distance twice. One of those was against Kamaru Usman. The other was that fight of the year contender against Gilbert Burns at UFC 273 down in Jacksonville. I got to see that cage side of one of the most insane fights that I've ever had the pleasure of seeing live and in person with my own two eyes. How can you say that a guy who has finished every other fight beyond that is boring? Literally nobody had that narrative prior to Saturday. In fact, the general thought surrounding Khamzat was that he was a first-round berserker who would go for the kill right away, and he would fade off, still find a way to win, but significantly fall off if he didn't get the finish early on in the fight. Another thing that I'll add to it, wrestling is a business decision. Every champion who has had a storied or tenured run in the UFC has had a quote unquote boring fight at some point in time in their career. Especially if it's a situation where they had a significant advantage in the wrestling department. Now, in this case, it was obviously apparent that Khamzat had a leaps and bounds advantage when it comes to wrestling. And if we're being truthful, when it comes to MMA based wrestling, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody who can match what he did the other night. But he made the business decision to go out there and win a world title. Yeah, he could have had the slugfest the way that he did against Usman or the way that he did against Burns or one of those other matchups. Absolutely could have done that. But you also run the risk of giving DDP the only route to victory that he had. Khamzat made the business decision to take the route to victory that he had the highest probability, which also reduced the damage that he took. I mean, he only got hit hard a couple of times, and that was by the blessing of Mark Goddard late in the fight by standing him up. People also question the gas tank of Chimaev, myself included. What Khamzat did by that performance right there, which he could have finished that fight earlier on with elbows from the crucifix or doing more damage from a spot where DDP just had no answer. But in turn, what Khamzat also did by going out there and having that dominant 25-minute performance, he answered a lot of questions about saying, can he go the distance? What does he have in the tank when it comes to the championship rounds? Is he somebody who can compete with ferocity past 7.5 minutes in a fight? Check, 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 check. Checked off all of those boxes in the process. He made a business decision to go out there and secure his legacy as a UFC champion. Now, going forward, do we see him take a little bit more risks as a champion now that he's secured that legacy and has become a figure of history, somebody who will never have to worry about finances ever again? That will be yet to be seen. But there are some quality contenders who are in the pipeline waiting for their chance to fight, whether that be coming up next, you have the Bahalyo versus Imavov matchup, or you have RDR taking on Fluffy Hernandez. One of those four will be in the fold to challenge for UFC gold in the near future. I cannot wait to see how those top contender matchups unfold and what we see next for the middleweight division. It's been a fun time for some of these title changes and with some of these rising contenders. And I think that the middleweight division is following as such. Moving along from that, we are going to close out the show by going 3 rounds. Real quick before we get into 3 rounds, just want to say, if you have any thoughts on the action so far today, please reach out to me on social media. That is at Comments from the Peanut Gallery on Instagram or on Threads. Also want to shout out the Guardian Project, which is Jiu-Jitsu for All, especially with school on the horizon right now. I know that there's going to be a lot of you parents who are looking for activities to get your children into. The mission for Guardian, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, they're committed to providing free jiu-jitsu and youth scholarships to the underserved kids around the world. They are dedicated to offering children year-round stability and consistency through their programs, focusing not just on their physical transformation, but also on fostering positive relationships, mentorship opportunities, and secure environments during some of these tumultuous and challenging times. By partnering with these trustworthy academies, donors can trust that a minimum of 85% of their contributions will directly fund the scholarships of the students that they support. If you want to make a tax-deductible donation to help support a student in our community today, check out factoryxmuaythai.com for more details. But moving along from 3 rounds, got my man Danny Bailey holding it down. First round, what do we at?
All right, Jordan, UFC legend Frankie Edgar is planning to make his return to competition for BKFC against Jimmy Rivera, pending commission approval. How badly do you want to see this fan favorite and former champion back in action?
I have zero interest in seeing Frankie Edgar get back in there to compete, especially in a bare knuckle boxing match. The reason why Frankie Edgar retired from the UFC and walked away from MMA was because of the head trauma that he sustained at the end of his run. He was knocked out bad multiple times in his final fights with the UFC and sent into retirement by our friend of the program in Chris Oguapo Gutierrez. He was also on the wrong side of a horrific knockout against upcoming bantamweight title challenger, the Sandman, Corey Sandhagen. For those reasons, and especially going up against a guy like Jimmy Rivera, who is a power puncher, who loves to fight in a phone booth, and is, he's by no means some world champion type of guy, but he is a very dangerous fighter, especially when you put him in the bare knuckle realm against a guy who is not known for his boxing or is not known for being a traditional boxing specialist in Frankie Edgar. For the love of God, commission, please do your job and do not grant Frankie a license. Please do not do that. We do not want to see this. He should not be in there. I just don't want to see it.
The 3 biggest free agent signings of 2025, Aaron Pico, Patchy Mix, and Patricio Pitbull went 0-3 in their UFC debuts. Are you surprised at the results?
I'm not necessarily surprised at the results being losses because nothing is guaranteed, especially with them making debuts against top-ranked fighters. But I am thoroughly surprised in how those losses unfolded. At UFC 319 over the weekend, Pico got sent to the place where time doesn't exist against Lerone Murphy, who hadn't finished somebody in 4 years. Patchy laid an egg against Mario Bautista, a fight that everybody thought was winnable for the Bellator champion, who is known for being a grappler and a submission specialist and did not attempt a takedown. Then you had Patricio Pitbull, who was stuck in the mud against Yair Rodriguez, but it should be noted he did bounce back with a decision victory against Dan Ige. Look, there's definitely quality fighters that are outside of the UFC who are world-class and can compete, but that number is select, and there's a lot more factors other than just being good at fighting to be successful in the UFC. And, granted, he now wants them to shine or to do well or to get as much as he can out of them, or maybe just has them there to build some names off of. But you can imagine that away from the public, somewhere in his hidden quarters, you have Dana White sitting there like a Mr. Burns in his most Dr. Evil fashion, seeing all of these high-profile Bellator and Ryzen and these other signees that are failing as soon as they enter the UFC in relation to some of his fighters that are existing on the roster. He's just sitting there like, yes. That's just him having his own self-validation that the UFC has been the superior product all along. And, with the results, it's been a tough run for some of those guys. Yes, you've had a couple who have had success like MVP and RDR. Manel Kopp you could throw into that mix, but in large, there's been quite a few of them that have not had a good run since joining the UFC.
And third and final round, Olympic gold medalist Gable Stevenson is set to make his MMA debut next month for LFA. What are your thoughts?
I think we all saw this one coming at some point. I say that I think that we saw this all coming at some point for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, it's a natural transition for a lot of wrestlers to make after their collegiate competition. Though for Gable, he's already won an Olympic gold medal. Checks that off of the list. There's not a whole ton of massively profitable ventures in the wrestling world, though he is one who would potentially be someone who could garner those opportunities. It's not to say that it can't be done, because there has, and there's never been a bigger time or a better time to be someone of that world. There's been more opportunities that have unfolded over the last 2-3 years than ever in history. And especially you see the rise of notoriety, like your guys like your Jordan Burroughs and so on and so forth. Like there is the chance that he could have gone that route. But you also see that, well, Gable tried the route of the WWE, and for what it was, that was a flop. Gable had one of the lowest audience approval ratings of any WWE superstar since they have recorded that metric. Whatever it was when he was in the realm of trying to be a sports entertainer, just did not hit the mark with the audience. And that's considering his world-class athleticism that was, after that failed venture with the WWE, enough rub or enough shine to get him an opportunity like his Minnesota brethren, Brock Lesnar, and got him a tryout and a training camp invite with an NFL team. He was a camp invite for the Buffalo Bills, did not make the team. Kind of saw that coming. The contrast to Brock was a 6'5", 300-pound freak. Gable is much more of the DC mold. He's a lot more of that smaller, really fast, fire hydrant bowling ball type of build at heavyweight. That being said, that's a couple of things that kind of fell through with WWE, with the NFL, not pursuing grappling as his main venture, or wrestling as his main venture. He's going to be making that debut for the LFA, and I can say that I'm not surprised at all. Again, he's going to be doing it at the Mystic Lake Casino, which is right there in Minnesota. He's going to pack the house. I can imagine that the energy in the building for the LFA that night is going to be otherworldly. When you have, it's not every day that you have an Olympic gold medalist come and make their MMA debut for your promotion, plain and simple. And it's an occasion that is worthy of that sort of notoriety. He has the skill set to go in and be able to win fights right away. But where does that wrestling base by itself take you? It's tough to tell, especially when we're talking about the heavyweight division, when all it takes is one to completely change the course of a fight or end it. Another thing that we don't know from the outside looking in, and we won't know until the fight actually happens, how does Gable react to getting hit? That's a major question that you have to ask for a lot of wrestlers. There's been how many Olympic gold medalists throughout the years? How many NCAA Division I world champions throughout the years that eventually turned toward mixed martial arts, but for one reason or the other, never made an illustrious run? But in some cases, and I could say to it from a couple of guys who I've witnessed Olympic gold medalists in the gym and other Olympians as well. I can tell you that there is one very prominent American gold medalist who I've spent time in with the gym, who the striking, if he would have continued to choose this path, had the massive position that he's in now, which was the best career option that he could have taken, it would have been a liability having to strike. Yes, does he? It's just like Bo Nickel. Some of the best wrestling that you can say on an MMA roster for any promotion, if we're talking about the strict discipline of wrestling, how does that change when you add strikes into the equation? And how are they able to handle themselves amongst the adversity when getting punched in the face? What happens when that takedown that they shoot for doesn't land the first time and they wear a couple of shots in the process? Does that confidence get discouraged? What happens when the body gets touched up a little bit? There's so many things that can go wrong. And that's why we've seen very few be able to go and make a top tier run. All of that to be said, September is going to be the first step on this run in mixed martial arts for the Olympic gold medalist, Gable Steveson. How do you foresee his run going in MMA? Let us know. You can hit me up on social media. That's at Jordan Kurtz, or excuse me, at Comments from the Peanut Gallery on Instagram or on Threads. But just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are all out of time. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in with us each and every week. It was great to be back here in studio at the number 38 presented by Volo after a few weeks while the boys were out covering the Broncos at training camp with boots on the ground, giving you all of that all access coverage. Big thank you to Danny, always keeping me locked in each and every week. If you can, hit that like, share, and subscribe wherever possible. We will be back with you next week, same time, same place. I'm Jordan Kurtz. This is the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports.